This was a few years ago. Funny enough, it was on Halloween. A friend and I were driving around, really just passing time and enjoying the rich kid part of town, where they really try their hardest to show off their money, but a number of decorations. Fog machines, lights, sounds, music, the whole 9 yards. As we drove down the street, we ended up getting to a row of houses with the lights turned off. Not a single light save the moonlight and our car lights. That street was usually blacked out, with the exception of one house. An older man who would always go all out for every holiday. It was as creepy as it could be. Skeletons, a witch in the background, some odd chants and laughter. My friend saw that he had a Take One candy bowl with full-sized candy bars, so he parked the car and got out. I followed him past the mock graveyard and walked up to the bowl. As he reached into it, bam! A little hand popped out from it and made him jump. He literally ran back to the car. As I laughed, I grabbed a bar for myself and headed back to the car when I realized something. Those chants and other noises were not coming from here. I let my friend know as I got back in, and we decided to drive further. He noted that there is a little graveyard that's open all night, so we decided to check it out. It took a second to get there, but when we arrived, we could hear the chants more clearly, and very faintly we saw some lights. We turned our own lights off and slowly drove up. As we entered, I got an odd feeling. Halloween night in a graveyard. This is how the movie starts. But we had a car, and were big enough to take down a big guy or two, let alone a couple of emo kids trying to summon a demon or something. But as we finally see them, a group of people wearing robes, dancing and chanting around a fire. Not just a little twig fire, no, firewood and logs, heavy dancing, a 5-foot-tall fire. The people around it were dark-skinned, with paint on their faces. One older woman, as she chanted, tossed something into the fire, and then she pulled out a chicken from seemingly nowhere. It was either already dead or had just been killed. It was very limp, like it had no movement of its own. At the same time, we both just looked at each other in shock, more so out of laughter than fear. And as we chuckled to ourselves, she turned her head, as slowly as possible, and stared directly at us. We had no clue if she knew or had a sixth sense, but she stared at us for at least 10 full seconds, and then smiled and waved us over. My friend was in flight mode. He took the car out of park and went to floor it, only nothing happened. Literally almost no noise. Like the engine stalled or something. So yeah, this is where the movie says based on a true story. One other man with white paint on his face took a look at us and also waved us over, like he wanted us to join them. But then the car finally woke up, and we got the hell out of there, not looking back for a second. This took place about 2 years ago. I used to live 3 streets over from a massive 300-acre graveyard. My old neighborhood was divided into 2 sections, one of which is a grid system, and the other half is a twisted, secluded area. The graveyard spanned half of the grid system in my neighborhood, which was the area that I lived in. I had a close friend who lived 2 streets from the graveyard, on the other end. We spent almost every Saturday at each other's houses, mostly sleeping over. This night, at around 3 in the morning, I woke up his mum by laughing. She came downstairs and kicked me out. Normally, when I left his house, I would walk to my house on the street at the bottom of the cemetery. It was a straight shot to my house. As I was walking, I heard what sounded like a cat in a huge amount of pain coming from inside the graveyard. I decided to go try and find it so I could potentially help it out. I could tell it was pretty far inside the cemetery. I hopped the fence and began looking. I got to the center of the graveyard and I could tell I was about 30 to 40 yards away from the cat. By now, the cat is screeching and howling. It doesn't sound like it has moved since I first heard it crying in the street. As I closed in on the spot I think it's in, the screeching stopped. I stopped in my tracks, and something felt very off to me. Then, a guy wearing a hood walked out from behind a tomb, about 50 feet in front of me. After a few seconds of staring at each other, he made a cat noise. I gasped, and he started to run at me. I turned around and took off sprinting. I looked over my shoulder after maybe 30 seconds of running, and he had stopped chasing me and was walking back towards the tomb. I made it out of the cemetery, jogging home now. After about a minute, I heard the cat noises start up again. Before I continue with the final story, if you've enjoyed this video so far, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to see future content from me, as well as help me in the algorithm. Thank you. This incident happened in the 1990s to a relative of mine, his younger cousin, and a few others. I will call this relative Dave. Dave and his wife were in their 20s and had not been married for very long. Dave had a younger cousin who was being raised by her grandparents. The grandparents lived out in the country and there were not a lot of kids her age to hang around with. So Dave and his wife would often invite her along if they were driving into the nearest city to see a movie or play mini-golf, etc. It was the cousin's 13th birthday. She wanted to have a sleepover, so it was decided it would be at Dave's house. She, the cousin, invited 5 of her closest friends. Due to their age, Dave and his wife were not all that mature, and when around the kids, they would often act like kids right along with them. They decided, later that night, they would go to a graveyard. I guess just for the thrill or something. There is not much in our tiny town to do. In our small town, the graveyards are located out in the woods. This particular one was surrounded by thick woods, no houses nearby. It was small and had a chain-link fence around it, and a streetlight near the gate where you enter. The caretaker had a streetlight installed at some point, presumably to deter teenagers from going there to drink and party. Well, Dave and his wife and the 6 girls all exited the car and walked around the graveyard, and were laughing, joking, chasing each other, telling ghost stories, trying to scare each other, just being silly. They finally got tired of playing around and decided to return to Dave's house. They made the walk back to Dave's large 70s model car. The girls piled into the back, and of course, he and his wife got into the front. All of the girls were talking and giggling, being silly, whilst Dave, sitting in the driver's seat, was getting ready to start up the car. Whilst this was happening, they heard a tap on the driver's side window. It was not a tap like someone using their knuckles. It was like a ting of someone using a light metal object. Everyone looked towards the window. There was a guy standing there, holding a machete. The tip of the machete was what he had used to tap on the window. Dave and his wife said this guy was dressed like Rambo. He was not wearing a shirt, had some kind of rag tied around his head, and was painted up with green and brown paint, kind of like what army guys do when they go on missions. Dave assumed he might have been asking for help, so he began opening his door to get out and talk to the guy. When he did this, he said his wife and all of the girls started screaming and diving for the door. The girls were diving over the seat and his wife across the seat. They managed to pull the door shut and locked it, and frantically began locking all of the doors. Then the girls and Dave's wife all started screaming at Dave, saying, "No, go, go!" whilst he was twisting the key in the ignition. This strange guy did this weird karate move, like you might see on TV. He was spinning the machete around and doing a few kicks. Dave cranked up the car and they took off out of there. Later that night, they rode back to the graveyard to see if he was still there, and of course, this time, they had the doors locked and did not exit the car. They thought they saw someone lying on one of the graves towards the back of the graveyard, but it could have been a trick of the lighting. We don't know to this day who this individual was. I believe he was either on drugs or seriously mentally ill. It creeped all of them out that this very strange guy was probably hiding in the graveyard, watching them earlier in the night, when they were walking around out there laughing and having fun, totally oblivious to his presence. That's all the stories I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers, as we are so close. And also consider watching some of my previous content. Thank you.